through the years, some of the politicians that were that, like meeting someone like Senator McCain, I ended up doing some lighting for him, when he did his Tonight shows. And so it became someone, it's not my politics, but he was a great guy and it was fun to kind of hang out with him. And I had written this guy, Mike Murphy, who you may know from NBC, ran part of his campaign. And we were friends, and we're in Vegas one time. And he's like, hey, Senator McCain, he's running for office, but people keep asking him all the time, would you be happy being vice president? And he has a temper and he gets mad. I need a joke, because, he doesn't handle that well. And I was thinking, I don't know, it just came out. I'm like, what does he say when they ask him he wants to be vice president? He should say something like, well, I was a prisoner of war, so I don't want to spend another 4 years in the dark. And so he told McCain, and McCain loved it. He signed a book to me, and he would use that constantly. He would, and then, even when he wasn't running, I guess that became part of his speech.
This is Coop's Comedy Corner. Coop's Comedy Corner.
Welcome to Coop's Comedy Corner. I'm your host, Steve Cooper, and coming to you the week of Thanksgiving. This will actually air after Thanksgiving, so I'm wishing you, when you hear it, I hope you had a happy Thanksgiving. And I want to give a quick shout out to my producer, Jimmy Corhan. Jimmy's making this thing happen. He works with Comedy Trainwreck out of Philadelphia, and he has so many shows. He helps so many Philadelphia comedians and podcasters. So I want to give it up to him. And I'm excited about my guest today. I never met him. I know people he's worked with. I know many people he worked with when he was on Dennis Miller and stuff like that. And I always like his posts. Sometimes you see posts. There's so many posts on Facebook these days, and some of them, you just go, oh, this sucks, and you move on. But this guy's posts are always insightful, and they're funny, and they're political. And I don't post political stuff because people always yell at me. But he's a five-time Emmy winner. And my guest is Eddie Feldman. How you doing, Eddie?
Hey, I'm good, Coop. Good to see you. Nice to meet you, and great to hang out.
Yeah, it's funny. I was looking at your IMDb, and you've done a lot of writing besides Dennis Miller, like Law and Order and stuff like that, like your post. I want to get into it. Now, did you start off as a comedian? What was your path into writing comedy?
Well, my path, oddly, was I started out after college working with troubled youth, kind of. With kids and with sort of emotional difficulties. And it was funny because I mentioned that once to Drew Carey. I said, yeah, I did that before comedy. He goes, yeah, you just made a lateral move when you went into stand-up. I'm like, you're right. But so, yeah, I went from that. I was like, I tried stand-up. It was like, okay, I knew I couldn't do social work all my life. And I was always thought I was funny as a kid. And then I started stand-up, and that's how I really wanted to write. I like to write, but there was no real pathway then to writing. I grew up in upstate New York. There was no way like, oh, I'll just move to New York and be a writer. I had no idea. So I somehow weaseled my way into stand-up, and that's how it kind of started me eventually into a more writing comedy. From this, and that was my way in. But there's which really happens a lot, I think, with stand-ups moving into writing or producing or acting. But that's what my path was.
Now, were you a fan of comedy when you were younger? Because I always think back to me, I remember I've told this story many times. I remember I found a Lenny Bruce album in the dollar bin. And I remember my parents gave me a George Carlin Toledo window box. Now, my parents grew up in the suburb. I grew up in the suburbs outside Philadelphia. They had no idea what a window box was. I saw the pot leaves on his shirt. I didn't know what that was, but I listened to it, and it made me laugh because his voice is, Jumbo Shrimp and all that. So I started following comedy at a young age. And I remember watching on PBS, watching Woody Allen movies like Take the Money and Run with my father. And I fell in love with comedy at a young age. Were you like that? Were you like a big comedy fan when you were younger, or what made you want to eventually?
Yeah. No, I was. I mean, I was a big fan of Class Clown. I had memorized the Bill Cosby "Why Is There Air," a whole album, and used to recite it, to my friends. The Alan Sherman, My Son the Nut. I knew all that stuff, and so I started listening to all those sort of things. In fact, one time after I was a stand-up, I did a show where I grew up in Saugerties, New York. And it was the guy who invited me there had a restaurant, and I performed it at this restaurant at this, place. And at the end, he got mad. He goes, "Why didn't you do your Noah bit?" And I'm like, "Noah? I don't know what you're talking about." No, he goes, "As a kid, we do Noah." I go, "That's Bill Conti. That was I had my own stuff." He goes, "Yeah, it was great, but I was hoping you do Noah." I go, "Well, can't do that." So no, I that was my way in too. I learned a lot from that. Oddly, I forgot, but I had reconnected with some kids that I went to, grade school with, and they reminded me in 8th grade. So I went to a Catholic school. They reminded me that our lay teacher at the time, not a nun, gave us the Dick Gregory biography to read about a comedian, which was basically titled The N-Word, which I won't say. But I'm like, yeah, that was never thought about it being weird at the time. But I learned about, him being a stand-up and what that was like. So yeah, I kind of early on got into that world and was interested and helped train you because you see how they do it.
Now, did you start comedy in upstate New York, or did you start in New York City? Where did you actually start going on stage?
Oh, so what happened was I was working working with delinquent kids at this point in Northampton, Massachusetts. I met these guys who played basketball, and they said, "Hey, there's this comedy thing, stand-up thing out from people who go to UMass." And so I'm like, "Oh, let's go to see that." We went to see it in Deerfield, and the guy who was hosting that show, who was still at UMass, was Ken Ober, who then became a comedian and would host the Remote Control, and this other guy, Mike Guy. And I was like, "Oh, this is interesting." They had friends who were doing comedy in Norfolk, Virginia, who had then met. I actually went down to Norfolk to visit them and did an open mic night, wrote some stuff, and that's where I kind of went. Then I went back to try it out more in New York City. I was still in Massachusetts. And then the Virginia Beach Comedy Club opened up, and I ended up going down there for the summer, which gave me a lot of stage time. And then that went back to New York. But that was a big break because the guy who ran that club said, "Hey, you can host our open mic every Tuesday, do all the time you want." And then they started booking me in clubs in Richmond and Virginia Beach and Greensboro. And then one time I got back up to New York, I was like, oh, I had, kind of met people, established myself, had an act, and then moved pretty quickly into that, world and got into it. But that was a big, working through the South really helped me a lot.
Well, it's funny, the road. I mean, I used to work for the Fletchers in Virginia, Steve and Anita, and I know the Virginia Beach was a Thorogood Inn, right? But I don't know who booked that.
That was the Thorogood. So Steve and Anita were my friends. Were friends of the people who taught me. They're the people who talked me into trying stand up, and I rode down with them in their van, stayed with them in Norfolk, and that's who really, helped with that. So yeah, I knew the Fletchers before they got into comedy. They were interested in it. So the original club was the Virginia Beach Comedy Club, which was run by the people that ran the Richmond Comedy Club. So in a way, I kind of introduced them, but then they kind of took off and they took over that Virginia Beach Club, the Thorogood, from this guy, the Greek guy, Mike. So yeah, that was a big starting point for me.
Now, when you're in New York and you're performing, when do you start actually trying to hone into writing? Because it's, I mean, I remember there was a guy named Ray Panetti. Me and him wrote a Mad About You spec years ago. I was living in North Jersey, and some lady liked it, but she was like, some agent was just like, you know how it is, these fly-by-night agents.
Yeah.
And nothing ever came from it. But we had saw it. We said we wanted to try to parlay into it. When did you decide to start doing the writing besides your act?
Well, so, what I guess what happened was Stand Up New York at the time had just opened, and I had worked there, and they were doing on Mondays, they started a political comedy night, which was very different. Back then, people weren't doing political comedy because nobody was paying attention to politics and nobody knew who you would be talking about. So I started writing specifically for that night, saying some jokes and things. So I was still on the pathway of, hey, I want to be a stand-up and maybe I have a sitcom, all that sort of world. And it turns out that I ended up opening, doing some colleges with Dennis Miller. We had met each other a little bit just before he got Letterman. I met him at Catch a Rising Star when he was auditioning for Letterman that night. And we talked at the bar, and he's like, "Hey, are you a stand-up?" Like, "Yeah." He goes, "Could you come see me? I'm going to do an audition for Letterman. Why? I'd like to know how I did." I went in and he killed. He got the show. Went on to Saturday Night Live. And I, by happenstance, got to open for him on this kind of college tour. And it was on the college tour that we kind of hit it off. And we were sitting around a hotel room, and the whole Clarence Thomas thing was happening. And I really just said a joke, and he was like, "Hey, that's really funny. I'm doing Letterman next week. Could I do that joke?" And I was like, "Well, I'm not doing Letterman, so yeah, you can do the joke." And the joke was all about Johnny Watt Holmes, the X-rated porn star. And the way I said it in the hotel room was, I'm like, I feel bad for this whole thing. Is Johnny Watt? He said at some senior center, he's got his dick wrapped around a walker, wondering, well, how am I getting into this? And so he changed it to where he has it wrapped around the walker. Letterman repeated it several times. And then he said, well, he got back in touch with me. He said, I'm starting my own talk show. And, I know you're busy with the, stuff on the road, but I'll pay you if you want to write jokes and send them in the morning. And I was like, okay. So I had been writing, political stuff and topical. So I would write that. And after 2 weeks or so, he called me while I was in Buffalo, just before I got back from doing a college show. And he's like, "Hey, you know what? We had an opening. Do you want to come out and work on the show?" And I'm like, "Yeah, great." So I go, "When do you want me?" He goes, "Monday." And I'm like, "Wait, today's Saturday in Buffalo? What?" So I had to make my way back to New York, get on a plane, and fly out and be at the office at 9 a.m. And that's how, I got to really start to write and write on the TV, just because that was how my pathway into that.
Well, his show was after SNL, right?
So after SNL, he had a show on Tribune, which was Syndicated. It was the big push at that time was Carson was retiring. Who's going to take the reins from Carson, right? So initially, they were going to go with Gary Shandling at that. They had make a deal with him, but Gary didn't want to do it for whatever reason. And they went then to Dennis, who was on Saturday Night Live Weekend Update, and he decided, okay, I'll do that, leave Saturday Night Live. And that show literally, it lasted like for 6 months. That was my first foray into it. And 6 months of it, I went on my honeymoon. I came back. My first call was, "Show's canceled." Okay. So that's how.
Now, what was your responsibilities? First of all, who were some of the other writers in that first show, and what was your responsibilities for that show?
Sure. So I'll tell you the writer. So Kevin Rooney was the head writer at that time, who went up to a lot of stuff. The other writers on it were Mark Brazil, and Mark created that 70s show. Max and Dave, these guys, as Dennis called them, Mushnick and Pushnick, but they went on to create, let's see, Will and Grace. Steve and Leo from Chicago were two writers, and they went on to write the Santa Claus. They were actually writing the Santa Claus while we were doing the show. I went to their office one time, and they had a secret panel, and they had all their cards. Drake Sather, who you might is no longer with us, who wrote Zoolander, was on there, and so it was Nick Buckeye was the sidekick, who then is the showrunner now, and also wrote Paul Blart Mall Cop. So it was kind of a beating ground. I went in as a staff writer, never doing that before. Did some sketches on TV. My responsibility was to go in, write jokes, come up with pieces, and the other writer was, sorry to say I did, was Barry Crimmins. I don't know if you knew Barry Barry was a political guy out of Boston. I used to work at his show at Stitches all the time, and we were friends, and we ran into each other at the airport. Like, "What are you doing here?" He's like, "I'm going to go write for Dennis." I go, "Yeah, me too." So, so that was like, a weird sort of thing, but yeah, so it was every day you go in, pound out monologue jokes, try to come up with desk pieces. I had this idea for a sketch that was kind of like a Bill Nye the Science Guy before Bill Nye came around, and it was like an adult doing a kid's sort of science project, and then they go, "Well, you just do it." Like, oh, okay. So it's like, okay, now I'm doing sketches. After a week after there. So it was kind of trial by fire. Go in and do it.
Now you said that show lasted for 6 months, which blows my mind because it is such a unbelievable writing staff. I mean, you guys are all amazing. And it's just, what was it? I mean, did people maybe the Midwest, because, we used to say Dennis Miller was very hip, and I like the Midwest, you can see not really getting him that much with the cha-cha and all that. But you had so much talent on that writing staff. It was Cesario on that too, Jeff Cesario?
Jeff Cesario was not on that. He came onto the HBO show. Jeff was just doing stand-up. So no, he wasn't there yet. He came on when we went to HBO. But part of it was at that time period is like everyone expected people to get the ratings Carson did. Well, we look back, and I remember talking to Dennis years later, and he was getting like a 2.8, right? So, and the key demographic, that wasn't good enough for them. Right now, people like Kimmel in the key demographic and things get like a 0.7. So the difference, you could see the difference there of his show is like, it was huge ratings compared to what everyone was promising and hoping for, what Carson was. Well, and you're not Carson. It takes a while. It was syndicated, and so I think also we found out too that Dennis is not necessarily the 5-night-a-week guy. It's a grind to do that stuff. He was much better at the 1-night-a-week HBO thing. So, after 6 months, they kind of pulled the plug. But yeah.
Now, what do you do after that? Because you got up in 2 days' notice, and you go to LA, and then the show, you go to your honeymoon, and you come back, and the show is canceled. Now, you probably weren't doing stand-up on the road at the time because you had to write. But so, what were your plans after that show got canceled? What did you think was going to happen? What were you thinking? Like,
well,
where?
I mean, I started to. Because all my college work, I gave up all of those. I did some more stand-up, some local sort of things. I think I got a few more bookings, and then I did some other things like for Dennis. I did one thing I did was writing. I wrote the biography of Bing Crosby for Disney Channel. I got hired to do that, and then I ended up getting Dennis a job as hosting it. So you're doing that. I did the ESPY Awards. I did other writing and things. And then, the HBO show kind of got announced, which was, okay, so Dennis got a new show. It was going to be 6 episodes. It was going to be in a couple months, and you were making do. Luckily, my wife was working at the time, so she's helping support me. And then I got a call from a writer, Fred Wolf. And I don't know if you know Fred, but Fred was an album. He wrote, Tommy Boy and things. And he was working on this Chevy Chase show. And he's like, hey, you know what? They're getting rid of this writer. They need a writer. Would you be interested? And I'm like, well, I need a job. So I went in that Chevy. And, it was really just a couple weeks before the show started. And I was like, yeah, I can do this. But in 14 weeks, I'm starting as a head writer for this HBO show. And they're like, okay, fine, whatever. We just need help. And I'm like, okay. So I took that job. I started working there. That only lasted 6 weeks. I got paid for 14, and which was fine. I mean, it was Chevy was very actually nice to me. We grew up not far from each other in upstate and around Woodstock. So I mean that came along at the right time. It paid enough bills. Gave me some more experience, basically how not to run a late night show because things were kind of screwy there, and went from there. And then as soon as that ended, I had a few weeks of vacation, and I did then the HBO started in that, so once that kind of started, it helped. It was only 6 episodes the first season, really. So it was like, okay, but that's how it works. I mean, it's all piecemeal. It's not like, well, that's it for 20 years. You'll be fine. It's like, okay, good for now.
So you were a head writer on those first six up on those shows?
So I was so yeah. So Kevin Rooney came over. He was, didn't want to be head writer. So I was I was part of the deal. I'll come in as the head writer, or I had pretty good organizational skills. Lothario came in as a producer. Mark Brazil went on to do Third Rock. He didn't come over. Those other guys. So not really a lot of number of people came over. Oh, also on that, I forgot. Here's a guy I forgot that was on the first show, which was Norm Macdonald was a writer on that show. So another great writer. So anyway, so yeah, so so on that, that was the first 6 episodes, and so yeah, I was the head writer. That was and then there were a couple other people on the show, who then after 6 episodes decided wanted to move on. Jeff stayed for another season or two. Rooney moved on. I hired a bunch of other writers that I came across, who worked on, and Luke Clear, were great writers, great, comedy writers. So, and that lasted, almost 10 years. So that was my, that was a good, solid little place for a while.
Now, what is your responsibility as a head writer? Because a lot of people don't know that, when it says producer on sitcoms and TV shows, they're also writers. It's just a title that makes them,
right.
Writers always say, instead of giving them a nice pay raise, they give them a title. But it's, what is your job as the head writer on the Dennis Miller, on that show? What was your job? What did you do every day?
So every day, so basically we had, six or seven writers. That was all. I mean, we're writing a half-hour show a week. So my responsibility is twofold. One, to make sure the writers write, that we have a schedule. They know a big important thing is like, hey, by 1:00, I need monologue jokes, and then I need pictures for the big screen, and then I need rant. And then I coordinate with Dennis every day. I would send material, because he was living in Montecito, up to him where he could pick out for the day. Oh, hey, I like these jokes. I like this part of what the rant is. So that was the writing part of it. The other producing part would be to work with our talent producer on the bookings, constantly like, okay, what celebrities can we get? What politicians? Then going to those people and saying, okay, we'll have Al Gore. Well, what's the topic going to be? What are we going to have on the rant for that show? And why are they on? That was the difference in that show, which was nobody really did before, was we weren't really into promoting. If you have a movie, yeah, we'll say, hey, so-and-so has a movie coming out but we're not there just to promote the movie. We're there to talk about what the rant is and what the subject matter is. So it was that. I mean, so there's a lot of the production to it, besides the going over the writing and, getting submissions from people if we were replacing writers, and really taking to make sure that everything that Dennis wants to do is then edited and in the teleprompter from when he walks up there for a live show, that he then says, okay, we're the pictures work with the boost. So it's a lot of coordinating and creative at the same time. That's what you're doing.
So after that first season, when you took that job, did you think as you said, it went to 9 or 10 years. Did you think that it would have any legs? Because 6 episodes isn't a lot. I mean, now HBO shows are 10 episodes, but I don't know how many John Oliver's has episodes. I think probably is more than 6. But what did you think the future was after the first season? What did you think? Did you feel like it was going to keep going?
Well, so we got some really good reviews out of those 6 episodes, because it was very different. I mean, Dennis at that time, had kind of developed from his act. And I guess one of the other things I did before that was I opened for him when he did his HBO special, which was They Shoot HBO Special, Don't They? Well, that was really the first he started doing, quote, rants of, which were longer sort of diatribes about a topic, and he had a few of them in there. So we incorporated that into the show. And so that made it very different. And it was smooth, there were no commercials. People were on, not promoting, but talking about stuff they were interested. And it made it very different. That didn't really exist before. So it was a new sort of format. And so after the 6 episodes, we got a good review in the New York Times. All those are like, okay, come on, we got to keep this going, right? We have to do that. And just before while we were still going, you had to submit for the Emmy Awards, and the the producer at the time, Kevin Flattery, this guy said, "Do you guys want to submit for the Emmy Awards?" And we're like, "Well, we just started. I don't know." And so, but like, okay, he talks to us, and we submitted, I think, for best show and also for writing. So because why not? I don't know. So it turns out that in the meantime, we end up winning the Emmy Award for Best Writing, which is a big deal because we're up against Letterman and Leno at the time when those guys are hottest. So it's like, oh, we were embarrassed about, so all of a sudden we're standing around with an Emmy Award, and and HBO had never won an Emmy Award. And so once we did that, we were like, okay, well, they got to pick us up. And I think they picked us up for another 13 episodes, but there was a few months sort of break, but that was okay. In that world, you're like, yes. And then once that happened, we won again. And I think it was either year after we won for best talk show, and no cable show had ever won, Sopranos or anything like that, ever won, best talk show or an Emmy for a best show of any kind. So once we started winning those awards, it sort of like, okay, it helped with getting picked up. Not, we're on forever, but for those 10 years, it helped us.
What was it like winning that first Emmy? Because, who was it? Someone told me that someone who wrote for Everyone Loves Raymond. I don't know if it was Lou Schneider or Capobiano or Scrovan, but they said when they won the Emmy, like you could just like walk around the after parties with like an Emmy. You go show up at the party, everyone wanted to talk to you. It was like this weird feeling. But they said it's not the real Emmy. They give you a fake Emmy and they mail you the real Emmy. I don't know if that's changed. But what was it like when you guys won? I mean, you were sitting there. Did you think you were sitting? You were at the awards, I'm assuming. What was it like?
Yeah, it's the Primetime Awards. No, we didn't think so because Letterman was at the hottest that he's probably ever been. He's on CBS. You got Leno, who again, those are big network shows. We just happened to submit, and I get into this little wormhole. So it was a total surprise and a total shock walking up there. And the thing is, when you're on stage and you're looking down at the audience at every famous person from TV in front of you. But yeah, then when you go back to the governor's ball, you have this magic wand in your hand, which is, everyone, will come up to you. You can walk up to anybody, and who wants to hold it. And I believe at that time you got your Emmy, but the band on it, there's a band that goes around it. That's what they sent you. And then you affix it yourself, if I remember that first one. So it was a blank one. And then later you got the band. I don't know. I know now they do send. So I think they wait or whatever. But yeah. So it was, it was a shock. It was like for your, you get married and you're getting married. It's a big day. You didn't know you're going to walk in and walk out with an Emmy Award and see Letterman in the hallway. As you're walking by him with your statue and he's empty-handed. Like, good. Sorry, Dave.
No, let me ask you okay, so you've won 5, right? You've won 5?
Yes.
And he's okay. So
yes.
You won the first 2 years. Now, was there a year where you lost after winning and were you like sort of pissed off because you're like, hey man, we already won 2? I mean, what is it like after you've won and then you lose? Do you really feel rejected?
Well, we won 4 in a row. How it worked is we win 4 years in a row, right? So, and one of those years we won that show. So I walked around the governor's ball with an Emmy in each hand. I couldn't shake Tom Hanks' hand. I had to give the one Emmy to his wife so that I could shake Tom Hanks' hand. Sorry, dude. Sorry, Tom. I'd like to shake your hand, but maybe your wife which name could hold the Emmy? Thank you. So, and then Charles Dutton, The Rock, was like, can I hold the? Yeah. And so so anyway, yeah. So yes, and what would happen is, so the show would be in production when the announcement of who's nominated for Emmys, and I had this thing that I would find out because it wasn't the internet then. Somebody would call our PR person, Jeff Abraham, who you probably know, would call and say, "Yeah, you guys got nominated." Okay. Well, I would go to the Grove and get a dozen of Bob's donuts and be in and put them on our conference table. And so when the writers came in, if they saw the box of Bob's donuts, they knew we got nominated. So the year we didn't, there were no donuts. So that's how they found out that they were snubbed. Well, I shouldn't say that. We had been nominated, but we didn't win. So I guess it was the donut. Finally, after maybe 7 years, we weren't nominated, and then the donuts were over after that. But that was my way of like, congratulations, who got donuts. So yeah, it is a big thing, and that's when I watch the Emmy Awards and other people coming up, and sometimes people are like, oh, are they staking it? It's like, no, this is a big deal. This is a thing. Most of these people haven't won anything in their life. And now this is something that says, hey, I made, these are my peers who voted for me. So it is a big deal.
Now, where do you keep your Emmys? Because like 5 Emmys, it's like after a while. I mean, if you have 5 Emmys, people are like, "Man, this guy's really bragging." I mean, it's great. I would brag. I'd have an Emmy on my car.
Well, I kept them. Mostly I had them in on shelves and things. Now I would admit I kind of have them in storage because it's like, all right, it's going on here, but yeah, so I have them in a box stored, and it's like at some point it's like my wife's tired of dusting them, but yeah, so I still have keep them, but yeah, but yeah, for the most part, yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
Now, did you know, when did you know that Dennis's show was going off, when that show was ending? Did you see it coming, or was it out of the blue? I mean, it was one of those things. Sometimes people say they get blindsided, but sometimes people say, well, we decided we're not going to do it any longer. How did it end with that show ending?
Well, that show ended, it was an HBO decision, and which was okay. And what was explained to me was, it was one of those things where it's like, anybody who has likes Dennis Miller is subscribing to HBO. So we're not getting new subscribers. If you like, and if we take him off, people have still, there's plenty of shows on, they eventually replaced it. They kind of replaced it with Bill Maher. It wasn't like, oh, Bill's taking over. It was like, it was a break and then Bill started. But I think out there 10 years, I think the show had kind of run its course. It ranted on as many things as possible. The format we could have changed, but yeah, so we knew it was coming. We knew it was like, okay, this will be the last year. We've done, I don't know, 100 and some shows, and enough was enough. Okay, would have liked to gone more, sure, but catch TV, and you had a good run, and then you went on to try to do some other stuff.
Now, when it was off, did you feel like you lost a part of your identity because you were with that show for so long? You're the head writer, the crew, Dennis, and that was your job. Like if someone saw you out, they go, "Oh, that's Eddie Feldman. He's the head writer for Dennis Miller." So that was your identity. So what happens when it ends? Do you sit there and go, "Oh shit, what am I going to do?" Or do you sit there and go, do you go into a little depression, or what do you do? How do you pull yourself together? Because I think it would be a little, you're used to that paycheck, and you just said it's Pete's work. You cannot get on a show. I mean, Chevy Chase lasted for whatever, 6 weeks. So what did you go through when that show, when you found out it was done, definitively done?
Well, then it was kind of like, okay, what's next? Where can I, what's the deal? And start to look for other possibilities. Luckily by then, by the time, winning awards and have experience, unlike the first time, when I, it's like, oh, I do clubs and colleges all over town type thing of like, I didn't have any writing credit to speak of. So then I had that. I mean, and then I had, so I was kind of looking a little bit towards maybe I go in. And also, here's the other thing. What the Law and Orders that I wrote, I actually wrote those while we were doing Dennis Miller on my breaks. And, we had like a 3-month break. I have my degree in criminal justice, and I started pitching ideas to the executive producers of Law and Order. So, and then for like 4 years, I would write an episode on my break. And so I kind of like, okay, do I want to go into drama? What do I say? Is there a sitcom that I want to do? And, I actually went and thought we were going to set up a sitcom with a comedian, Charlie Vericola. I don't know if you've ever ran into him throughout the years, but yeah, so we were friends and we had this idea. My friend Peter Golke, who he wrote Ice Age 2 and a bunch of other movies. And we had this idea for our friend Charles. The idea was that he's a skateboarder and, and kind of a vagabond, and he finds out that he has a kid. And and it's like, oh, okay. So Fox was interested in that, and they were like, hey, we really like this and things. And then the woman who ran Fox said, oh, I don't want Eddie doing this. We're doing a late night show. I want him working on that. And it's like, well, what about the sitcom thing? And it's like, no, we don't want you doing that. So if we want to do something for us, there's a guy, Orlando Jones, and we want to try this out for like, 6 months or whatever on FX to see how it works. And at that time, you're like, okay, what are my options? It's like, not work, take this job. Oh, yeah, I'll take this job. Yeah, as you say. So I was able to go from that, which again was more of a spec sort of thing. And, Orlando was great just to work out. But then literally, that show ended and I got a call from Comedy Central to say, hey, we need somebody to take over the Showbiz show with David Spade. We need a consultant. And I'm like, oh, okay. Again, like, well, one door closes, another opens. And because I had worked with Brostein's company a lot, met David, talked with him, and then went over there to work on that as a consultant, and then became later an EP on it and things. So kind of moved, as we say, jumping lily pads.
I want to go back to the Law and Order. Did you get the pitches because they knew you were an Emmy-winning writer? How did you get in with Law and Order? Because first of all, it's a New York-based show. Secondly, it's procedural, and people don't think, oh yeah, some guy who's the head writer for Dennis Miller. Even though your criminal justice is, oh yeah, he's writing Law and Orders. But how did you set up the meeting? Was it because of your agent, or was it because you had some clout because of the Emmys?
Well, yeah. So I was first of all, I was a big fan of Law and Order coming out of my criminal justice background. I loved it. I would watch it all the time, to the point where my wife goes, "Are you watching that again?" And then so I went to a WJ cocktail party. I think it was for the Emmy, something like that. And I met Renee Balse and Michael Trinuchin, who were the EPs of Law and Order at the time, which is, yes, it's shot in New York, but the writers were out here. So they introduced them, you had a little thing. It's Eddie Feldman, and they said, oh, hey, we're fans of your show. I said, well, I love your show, but my wife hates it because I watch it all the time. And they started laughing, and we're talking. He goes, and I said to them, I go, hey, I have an idea for an episode. Could I pitch it to you? And they're like, yeah, why don't you come in and pitch us the idea? So, yeah, it was because they knew what I did. It was so, okay, I take a pitch from a guy who's, and when I went in and pitched them this idea, basically, what it was, and I knew the show, and they're like, okay, we'll do that. And I'm like, okay, that's it? And they're like, yeah. They go, yeah, you'll write it up, and we'll work with you. And usually the back half, Renee will work with you on the back half because it's much more law-based and use, the way to do it. And I'm like, okay. So then I, beat it out, which I'd never done before. And wrote it and then got on the air. And they're like, hey, that worked out. Come back and pitch us something else. I'm like, okay.
So How much harder for you was it to write a full, because what I guess it's what, 48 pages, the script, I think,
Yeah.
for
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. So and then so compared to like writing jokes, did you pick it up right away writing that structure? Because it's a different structure. I mean, you're writing rants, jokes, stuff like that. This structure has to have the point. And you're right, the law and the order, the boom boom, and the beginning, and there's always that like offhanded, funny comment in the beginning. How hard was it for you to acclimate to that script writing? Was it easy or not?
It wasn't. I mean, because I had watched the show so much, and there's a pattern to it, and there's a way you see what was good at it wasn't a lot of with that show. It's like you don't even know what their private lives. It's very procedural. That first part and the other thing. So once I kind of had the idea of what that episode was, and actually the episode was, I got the idea from working at Catch a Rising Star, again, back to the Anita Hill thing and sexual harassment, because at the time, the guy who booked you at Catch a Rising Star was gay. But the comedians I talked to were just casually at the bar, couldn't figure out sexual harassment. They're like, well, if you don't want, women shouldn't have to, they don't want to do it. That, it's not, so there was always this thing. And I said to him, I go, well, your career is based on whether you get on stage here, right? I go, yeah. I go, well, the guy who books you is gay. Suppose he wants to sleep with you and you won't sleep with him. He could hurt your career. And they were like, oh, yeah, I kind of get it. So that's what this episode was about. Not the comedy. It was about an executive whose boss was gay, and the actor they got to play was Peter Reichert, who is a great actor, and Mary Beth Hurt was his wife. So they had cast it really well. So it just kind of laid out, and they helped me with, some of the stuff as far as the plan, but it went, I wouldn't say it wasn't hard. It was, of course, hard. You got to figure it out, but because of what the show was, I think it was easier for a first time in to write that. So, but yeah, I mean, I had written scripts before, but not too much, not really drama. So I have to say, they just gave me a shot. I could have stopped, and they're like, we can't shoot this. This is awful. But somehow it kind of worked. So.
Now, when you were in Dennis Miller Live, who were some of the really fascinating people you met as guests that you were like really blown away by? Because, like me, I do this and I have another podcast called Cooper Talk, and I had an hour and 15-minute interview with Steven Van Zandt, and I'm shitting myself as he comes up on my screen. He's got bandana on, and I'm like, I'm a huge Springsteen fan, and I also love The Sopranos. So for me, I was in there, wow, it's fascinating, and how nice he was. Now we just talked, and he told me the whole background of the New Jersey, music scene. So, I meet people. Ed Asner came into the studio in LA. You're just blown away because there's people, rich man, poor man, everything. But so for you, because you met some really high ranking politicians and stuff, I'm sure, who were some of the people that when you were doing guests on your show that you were really blown away and impressed by it?
Well, one is a writer, Christopher Hitchens, was on quite a bit. And he was really interesting because he was kind of that old school, a very opinionated writer. And then when you're done, you go sit with him and you drink a bottle of scotch, over the course of a couple hours, and talk about his Mother Teresa book. And he's a tell-all on Mother Teresa. So there's some really interesting people like that. The politicians, some of them weren't in studio because we did, remote sometimes, but, people comedy wise. So people that you really admire, like Dana Carvey is somebody who would come on and just kill. He'd just sit down and Dennis would go, how are you? And boom, and kill. Rickles was somebody as a comedian. In fact, he was the guest on that show that we won the Emmy. And I guarantee you, one of the helped us win was Rickles was on, people watched the whole episode, and there's Don Rickles being funny with Dennis, and it was, obviously well written, but, so those type people, through the years, some of the politicians that were, like meeting someone like Senator McCain, I ended up doing some lighting for him, when he did his Tonight shows. And so it became someone, it's not my politics, but he was a great guy, and it was fun to kind of hang out with him. And I had written this guy, Mike Murphy, who you may know from NBC, ran part of his campaign, and we were friends, and we're in Vegas one time, and he's like, hey, Senator McCain, he's running for office, but people keep asking him all the time, would you be happy being vice president? and he has a temper and he gets mad. I need a joke, because, he doesn't handle that well. And I was thinking, I don't know, it just came out. I'm like, what does he say when they ask him he wants to be vice president? He should say something like, well, I was a prisoner of war, so I don't want to spend another 4 years in the dark. And so he told McCain, and McCain loved it. He signed a book to me, and he would use that constantly. He would, and then, even when he wasn't running, I guess that became part of his speech. And I'm like, oh, I thought it was kind of edgy, but he was able to deliver the joke. He was able to, find that sort of sense of humor that fit him. So, but yeah, when you see kind of the celebrities but it's kind of those, to me, the interesting, Congress people that you don't normally, at that time see on talk shows, like Gore and those type people.
Now, are you still close with Dennis?
We're friendly. I mean, he lives up in Montecito. We'll talk maybe twice a year. I'll go up there for a lunch or some sort of thing. He does a lot of traveling now and stuff, and became a grandparent, and so. But yeah, we're fun. That sort of thing. Like,
I was just thinking because he's become very conservative, and I see your post. You're very liberal, so I always wonder if that gets in the meshing, or that's just your opinions because you are friends. I used to have, when I lived in LA, I had one friend who was really liberal and one friend who's really conservative, and we would come to my place in Burbank and we would drink wine, and they were very intelligent guys, and they would have really, not unlike now, they would have great conversations, and I would just be fascinated and just get buzzed and listen to them. And so, but now, how the internet, people just yell, but like, when you see Dennis, do you guys talk politics? Because
we don't talk any not really at all. No, you know what? He'll say something. I mean, that was always, even the thing I would say back in the HBO days, he kind of would come in with some sort of thing. And remember, you had probably 6 writers who were more liberal than him at the time. I mean, again, he was more liberal then too. And, people would talk out their opinions, and he's like, oh, I didn't think of it that way. Or, oh yeah. And that kind of, when you do that, it kind of, you see things a different way, because everyone now is just very much, I listen to right wing stuff. I listen to left wing, you talk things out and you go, yeah, but what about that? And you're like, oh, it wasn't until after that show that he kind of, in 9/11, that kind of shifted over. But, to be honest, when people ask me those certain things, it's like, hey, just remember, comedians have an act. There's this on, camera, and there's an off camera. It's not exactly the thing. It's like, okay, that's, yes, it's not a complete phony. It's got to be their point of view, but it might not be as far to the left or right as you think, especially like everybody else. It's like, well, yeah, they're hypocritical about that. His best friend, I think, is like Tom Hanks. So, oh, okay. So how could they possibly have a best friend? It's like, oh, because you just don't talk about stuff that it would get people upset.
I always compare it to the All-Star Wrestling, because like I remember sitting there, like, I remember the Iron Sheik and Hacksaw Jim Duggan got arrested driving down a New Jersey Turnpike, smoking pot and drinking. When in the ring, they hated each other. But that's why I always compare sometimes, like, people, they get along, but you're right, it is an act, and sometimes you battle back and forth just because people like it, and you probably, once you get off, it's different.
Yeah, that's your job. It is like, and it's funny because you mentioned that, because yes, wrestling and stand-up is very, because I did work at the WWE, and so, getting there is like, hey, there's this, the wrestlers are independent contractors, just like comedians, traveling around. They each have a point of view. In wrestling, it's cut a promo. For comedians, it's, being up in front of the mic. There's a lot of similarities in that, where you create your persona, and it's like, oh, who hates who, it's like all written, it's little case by ib. It's like, oh, it's like, oh, you mean, but then a lot of times people, even that, they would go, well, Dennis just makes up those jokes, on the monologue as he goes, right? No, that's not how that works. They just think, oh, he's funny, so he just comes spouts out these jokes, and it's like, no, yeah. So yeah.
Now, You've been in the business for a long time. How is Hollywood changing? How, I know like, when I talk to actors, it's changed a lot where they miss auditioning in a room because it's in that part. It's changed. Everything's by Zoom now. Auditions are on tape, which sometimes they say they lose the spontaneity because they know they can keep doing it and doing it till they get that right bit. So the acting part has changed. How is it on the writing end these days? Has the industry changed? I mean, like Steve Skroban said, he's sort of priced himself out because he's been around for a long time. He's written on shows, and he said, he's older and he's more seasoned. How is it? I mean, what is it like for a writer for you who's written for a long time? And of course, you're probably more expensive than some kid who's 23. I mean, what's the industry like for a seasoned veteran like you?
Yeah, it's like it is a young person's game because I would say it's in a way it's harder because again the price sort of thing. So if you're writing for Kimmel, well, Kimmel's been on for a long time, so he's got some seasoned guys there, and who's been with him, and there's some new guys. There's always some sort of new blood. But yeah, it's harder for a writer like me to go, oh, I'll just come in and write on Jimmy Fallon. I'll just write jokes now. And Jimmy, but if that happens, you do. I mean, I've known people that worked on the Tonight Show for years. They're still the great writers, but now they're not going to get hired on another necessary late night show. They've done well enough to, I think they're okay financially, but yeah, it's harder. I mean, I've moved into different things. Like I've written like for the New Yorker, submit, things like that, just because it's another outlet for me. And then development wise, I've been pretty big in that, but developing as far as, more game show stuff, which I did some of that, but also some dramas that I'm out with now. And so yeah, you know what? What hasn't changed? It's a hustle from that first time when I had 6 episodes to like, what am I going to do? A producer said to me one time, he goes, the difference between us and normal folk is like, we're always unemployed. We're always looking for our next job. And you got to figure like, how am I going to do that? What's the next place where they need me? What can I do? Now I have a lot of connections from over the years. Can I find young writers, to work with? Yeah. So you're always hustling. I mean, you never give up, you want to keep working, and I want to keep creating. So it's like, what else can I do? What else gets me, staying in the game?
So I always wrap up with this question, and you can personal and professional. What are some things when you look back at that you are really proud of? What makes you proud about your life?
Well, I guess, having grown up, I look back, growing up in a small town, my parents owned a deli and a grocery store. And, the idea of being able to say, okay, look at all the things I got to do. Somebody asked me recently, do you ever wish, it was my dentist. I was just there and I showed her a picture of my Pank Deli. She goes, do you ever wish that's what you did? And I'm like, I could have obviously taken over that, but I wouldn't have seen what I saw. I wouldn't have written for the people, the Emmy Award, that's a big part of it, but just my life would have been completely different. And I'm happy with like, the adventures of getting out of a small town. The other guy that got out of the small town where I grew up was Jimmy Fallon. We went to the same high school and things. And, when I spoke to him on a Zoom not long ago, he said to me, he's funny, he goes, you were the first guy that got out. And I know I didn't think about it like that. I didn't think it could happen, but you're right. Yeah, I got, that's, I liked it that, it's just funny because, yeah, you got out, whatever you accomplished, you got out of that small place. It was a good background, but you got to do stuff that, not a lot of people get to do.
Well, this has been awesome, Eddie. Now, are you on Twitter? Do you tweet? I know your Facebook first. You do. What's your Twitter?
I don't use because of that's my politics that I don't use Twitter. I was using Blue Sky, but I got hacked recently, And so now I have to get my thing back. I mean, on Facebook, I don't do, a lot of the stuff that I write now, because I submit a lot to like the New Yorker and some of these other places. So I don't do as much. Oddly enough, I keep the jokes to Facebook and just I do it because I like it. But yeah, I don't have I'm looking to try to team up with some people that are already pretty well known. But yeah, so I don't, I gave up on the X thing for a while. But I'll let you know if I get back on Blue Sky.
Yeah, you tell me. So people go look up Eddie. Go up onto and it's with two N's, right? It's Eddie Feldman with two N's.
Two N's, yeah, with two N's. Yep.
Yeah, so people, there's Eddie Feldman. Look him up. Look at his IMDb. Go check it out. Find his Law and Order. I'm gonna go find his Law and Order episodes. I'm gonna watch it. My wife's a fanatic for that show, so I'm gonna have to watch the Law and Order ones. I'm gonna find those episodes. Email me your episode titles. I wanted to watch.
Yeah. If you see one where there's with a cowboy boot sticking up out of a frozen pond, that's the one the Law and Order guys like that one the best. That's Fasha. It's about the mob and things. It was one of my favorites. Correct.
So people, go check that out and go check out the shows. Go to my one site, coopertalk.net. You can find over 1,050 episodes on there. I recently posted, I had Ali Walker on. I had Dizzy Reed from Guns N' Roses. And I just had Amy Hill on, who's just a wonderful, such a talented actor. So check that out. Go onto YouTube, find all the Coop Tank. That's my business podcast. I don't do that anymore, but there's about 85 episodes. I talk to local Philadelphia area business people. We talk about different inspiration and motivation. Also, I'm teaming up with a company out of Beverly Hills, Lawsuits and Lessons. Myself and attorney John Fagerholm have entrepreneurs on every week. We talk about what they do, their dreams. We had to talk about some legal issues. And don't forget, Coop's Comedy Corner. First, we'll go to coopscomedycorner.com. You can get swag for all my shows, but go to Coop's Comedy Corner through Comedy Trainwreck. Look for us on Spotify. Look for us on YouTube. And don't forget to check out all Comedy Trainwreck shows. We got, Jimmy Corhan does a great job. We got shows with John Kenson, the legendary Wid. You got Coleman Green. The list goes on and on. So anyway, check them out. I want to thank you for watching. Keep watching. And if you need to email me, it's cooper@coopertalk.net. And once again, I hope you had a great Thanksgiving. Thank you, Eddie.
Thank you. Great seeing you.
Coop's Comedy Corner.